Oh, it's the clicker. This is me. Hello, I'm Thomas. I founded a company called ICO Partners a while ago. We do a lot of sort of things. I'm a consultant, which means nothing and everything. But here I'm here to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is crowdfunding. I love crowdfunding, I love data. When crowdfunding started to become a thing on the video game space, I thought maybe I should look at the data more closely. Built a scraper that basically go onto Kickstarter and other websites to get the data about how games perform on those platforms when it comes in terms of smaller projects, not just the big headlines that people hear about on crowdfunding. I have worked on so I've backed a lot of projects because I really like crowdfunding and I like games. I've worked on quite a few projects. I've managed 8 campaigns so far, most of them on Kickstarter. I have advised people in different ways about 45 campaigns now. And I've run workshops for people from the video games and for the film industry. I've also started working a little bit more closely with tabletop games creators. This is a new thing since for the past 12 months. This is a big category on Kickstarter. About almost a third of the money raised on Kickstarter is done by tabletop games. But I'm here to talk mostly about video games. So we run a data scraper that goes on Kickstarter every day. A lot of the data I'm going to talk about here today is going to be Kickstarter specifically. And one of the reasons is, whereas there are other platforms that are offering crowdfunding solutions for video games, Kickstarter is still by far the biggest in terms of money, but also, most importantly, in terms of projects. This is where the brand became something on its own. I've run campaigns that were not on Kickstarter, and the project creators were still referring it to a Kickstarter campaign, because it's easier to say Kickstarter than say crowdfunding. So that became the equivalent of that. Sorry. So looking at money raised on Kickstarter for video games over the past few years, starting with 2012. Before 2012, the data is not really relevant. It was before the Double Fine Adventure Kickstarter that really put it on the map. What's interesting is that it's incredibly stable for the past 4 years now. With the video games on Kickstarter have raised about $16 million last year. This is not pledged. Kickstarter will usually reveal data that talks about how much money was pledged. This is money that was collected. That means that projects that got funded collected that amount of money. We are about half from the best years, which were 2013, 2015. Most of that money, you will see, though, was done through the big projects. So if you look at how many projects get funded every year, we still have about a project a day that gets funded. 380 last year, 352 the year before. 2015, which was one of the best years in terms of money, still only 374 projects. So it's not like the money went down because there are fewer projects getting funded. It's actually about the same. And this is more apparent in that graph where you see how many projects raise how much money in terms of tiers. So last year, there were a grand total of 5 projects raising $500,000 or more. And most of the projects raised $10,000 or less. So there's definitely a certain profile in terms of projects that get funded that are in a certain scope of the budget pressed on Kickstarter. We are still far from being able to fund the whole of your project on the crowdfunding platform. Even more so now, where as crowdfunding becomes something more established, there's been a few games that under-delivered in terms of what was promised, and people get a bit upset about it. The quality expected of a game as it launches on Kickstarter is much higher than before. So if anything, that the barrier of entry is a bit higher, and it's even less often now than before a mean to actually start a project but more complement the budget, get visibility around, and maybe put the finishing touches on the game. Looking at just the currencies, so Kickstarter limits the projects in terms of which country you can be from when you start your project. They are ultra strict in terms of regulation compliance. So if you are based in Poland, for instance, you can't launch a Kickstarter out of a Polish entity. You need to find someone else to carry the project, whether it's based in Amsterdam, Paris, London, the US, depending on what you do. The entity carrying the project defines which currency the campaign is made in. So if you are a US company, your campaign is going to be in US dollars, and it's going to be converted if you pay in euros as you make the pledge at the end of the campaign. This year is mostly for any words in place. There's been about 40 projects a year out of the UK, and there's a bit of a confirmation bias where people think you need to have a project in US dollars to be successful on Kickstarter. This is not true. This is actually one of the most tricky thing to do. Is you make your life more complicated for no reasons. People love your game, people will back your game. The currency you are displaying, that doesn't really matter to them. It's easier if it's a currency they are familiar with. It's easier if it's a currency they can relate to. I've run campaigns in Japanese yen. There's an extra challenge there because the values, people don't, when they see like 10,000 yen, they have no idea what it means. But it's not something that will block people to actually support a project. And there's been very successful projects done in many very different currencies, including in yen, in pounds, and if you look at the past year, 2019 was the best year to date for amount raised by British pounds project. It's also mostly due because almost half of that amount was done by a single project, one of the 5 projects that raised more than £500,000, a project called Subverse. Who has heard about Subverse in the room? One person. So Subverse is interesting. It's very adult theme with a very strong appeal to teenagers that wants to have anime wives, I think would be the way to put it, waifus. It's very weird, but also very surprisingly, I think 40% of the money they raised on Kickstarter was through China. And China is not a massive usual market for crowdfunding. So they managed to trick the trends, and the fact that they were actually doing all the projects through British pounds didn't prevent them to have actually a very good, strong international reach. So, when I talk about crowdfunding, there's a few pillars, a few things that are, I think, essentials to consider. And I'll go over them because before going into something that's more about like recent trends and things observed for the past year only, these have been true for forever. But they are still true now, so I still want to talk about them. And so, sorry about the formatting. So the first thing that's true is crowdfunding campaigns for games or for any projects are about emotional connection. People who back a project back it because they love it, not because they like it. This is a very, very strong, important distinction because you might have a project that you feel could work very well on a crowdfunding platform, but maybe your community, your fan base, people who are interested in your game just kind of like it. You need to have people who are ultra engaged, people who actually want this thing happen at all costs. That drives a lot of the successful projects you will see on Kickstarter. The second thing is the momentum principle. You need to have a successful campaign. You need to reach a certain threshold very early on. If you have a campaign that lasts about 30 days, you would think that you would have a more or less regular stream of money coming through the 30 days. But the first 2 days are actually where everything happened. First is when you announce, this is when you've got visibility. So if you don't get the good visibility at the beginning, it's much more difficult to get people who don't know about your project to hear about it later on, because that's where things are concentrated. But there's another principle, which is social proof. If people go to your campaign and look at it, and it's the first it's the first day, and they see you are at 10 or 20% already, they'll be like, oh, they're successful. I will support them. If you are a week in and you are at 30%, they will feel like maybe you're not going to make it. I will not, as a backer, spend my time and energy, my brain bandwidth, to actually create an account, put my credit card, and actually pledge for the game. There's friction there, and it's something that's very frustrating. It's proven that one of the best day you have in a campaign is the day you reach your goal, which is very frustrating because Kickstarter is the all or nothing crowdfunding campaign. So if you don't meet your goal, people who supported it, who pledged the money, don't get the money out of their bank account. But it's still not enough. People don't want to be associated with failure. They want to be associated with success. So the moment you reach your goal, they were like, oh, it's going to happen? So now I support you. Which as a creator is very frustrating. You want people to support you from the beginning to get you further. So getting those 20% in the first 48 hours is essential. And a lot of the marketing, a lot of the strategy behind a crowdfunding campaign will be around hitting that mark as quickly as possible. If you do 20% in 48 hours, the stats show that you are likely to succeed. If you do 20% in 2 hours, even better. It means you can, blow up your goal and go very far. Then there is the need of a demo. Video games where you could do like someone, a talking head, go in front of the camera and say, my game is cool, you should back it, but don't show anything, is incredibly difficult and doesn't happen anymore. John Romero tried it. If John Romero, with his reputation, cannot raise money on Kickstarter by just promising a game, 99.99% of the population cannot do that as well. You need to show the game, and if you can play the game, have a demo, even something simple, that will help a lot. I worked on the Good Life campaign with White Owl in Japan, and the day we released the demo, mid-campaign, was the day that things switched. We were doing okay at the time, but really the demo was the thing that made it successful and possible. Then I have like 3 red flags, games that never ever work on Kickstarter from a crowdfunding perspective. And I say never ever. There's a couple of examples that prove that wrong, but I would advise strongly against doing any of these kind of games as a Kickstarter campaign. Number 1 is free-to-play games. Free-to-play is the exact opposite of crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is about, I love what you do, I don't have it yet, but here's my money. Free-to-play is about like, let me play the game, and then along the line, maybe I will spend money. It's very, very difficult to get people to understand the value of what they get in the free-to-play game designs. So free-to-play games really work on crowdfunding platforms. Next is mobile. The mobile offering is very hard on crowdfunding. The price is lower if you do premium. So if you do like a game that's going to be $5, you need 4 times more backers than if you do like a PC game that's $20. And on top of that, the audience on Kickstarter, the people who tend to be interested by crowdfunding, usually tend to not be mobile game players. So mobile is incredibly hard. And the last thing is games for kids. Kids as an audience is really difficult because they are not the one doing the purchasing decision. If you go to a parent and say, do you want to pledge, $10 to $20 for a game for your kid, and we'll give it to you in 6 months or a year, if things go well. Most parents will be like, I have no idea what my kid is going to like in 12 months, so no. So this kind of like should help guide anyone who consider crowdfunding in terms of how are you ready for it and do you have the right prices for it. Then in terms of like my usual pillars, do not announce stretch goals. Stretch goals is when you reach your goal and you want to add more content to the game. Let's put more music and things like that. You'd say, give me $5,000, $10,000 extra on top of my current goal. People tend to look at past crowdfunding campaigns and see, oh, they've done stretch goals. They ask for this and that. And so they see those campaigns that are over, that display those stretch goals. What you need to realize is that announcing them at the very beginning sabotages your communication. sabotage what you try to achieve. That 20% that people have in their mind is about the goal, but if you have something really, really cool in a stretch goal, then that's their target. They don't think 20% is a good number anymore if you need an extra $100,000 on top of that. So not answering your stretch goal is probably my number one thing when I talk to people who are looking at the crowdfunding for the first time. Campaign timing, general advice. I was talking about that campaign development campaigns happen much later in development than they used to be. You need to have things that are cool to show. You probably need like a demo. You need to consider that. So actually, if you think like my game is like quite well on its way, but maybe you want to do a Kickstarter campaign still because you have something that looks good. You have a community you can capitalize on, and maybe it will make your product go a bit further. Also creates an extra marketing bit, an extra communication bit, and it's a good moment to relate with your user base that you have, another opportunity you have. Second point is the real competition to Kickstarter is not Fig, it's not Ulule, it's not any of the other like Indiegogo or the other platforms. The true one competitor to crowdfunding and Kickstarter is early access. There are lots of games that by the time you feel like you have something that's good enough to do a demo, maybe you are good enough to actually go into early access. And early access is much easier to manage. And to be honest, if you have a game that's very systemic, that's not necessarily like no narration, no things you spoil about, early access is probably a much better fit for gathering money and feedback and gather your community around than the crowdfunding campaign. And the last point is something else. Into that is like crowdfunding is a lot more than just about money. It's a good way to communicate. It will open the door of new discussions. You have a number of partners, potential publishers who actually look at crowdfunding campaign, even the one that fail, to see what potential good content is out there for video games. It's also a good way to celebrate with your community. It's a good way to test your market and understand if you have like the right tone, message to explain your game. Sometimes failing a Kickstarter because you're not good enough at explaining your game is a better thing than failing your launch of your full game because you realize that way too late. So there's a lot of side benefits into crowdfunding. Like super practical advice on campaigns, like things I've been repeating a lot over the years. It's all true. If you can launch on a Tuesday. If you can choose the date when you end on a Thursday. The other dates are pretty good, but these are kind of the ideal ones. It's better for your campaign to be 30 to 35 days. It gives people time to actually hear about it. It gives also if you do the campaign that starts and finish around the end of the month, you get 2 chances for people to actually support you when they've got their payroll, as simply as that. So that's good. And I mentioned that before. If you can stay in your currency, the actual added advantage to go making a campaign in US dollars is negligible compared to the headache of having to deal with the IRS and the administration that you will have to deal with for years after that. And then a couple of trends for the past 12 months. So all of them kind of like are coming through from the development of tabletop games. But they all benefit video games as well. So there's 2 sides. There's like new third-party services that are developing. So are incredibly new, especially the pledge managers, those services that help you basically deliver the reward to your backers. Very important if you have like physical reward, like tabletop games. But they also they've developed like a whole infrastructure and a whole set of tools that are very, very deep that allows you to do a lot of interesting things from a marketing point of view for any campaign that you want to run. So I mentioned a few here. Interestingly, some of them are like very recent, like GameFound and Blackbox are more like on the recent side. GameFound is if you know what BackerKit is, a pledge manager, GameFound is about the same, but it's free. There's like, they don't take money for lots of reasons. You can talk to them. They are a Polish-based company. They're Czech Republic-based company. They're very interesting to discuss with. And then interestingly, there's also some of those companies say, we want to do more on marketing. And BackerKit, for instance, has a whole suite of tools to market crowdfunding campaign specifically. They have their own tools like newsletters and they have their own database of users. But beyond that, they also have like a very interesting, very powerful tools for you to do marketing specifically targeted towards people who back Kickstarter campaigns. And that's a very something that the platforms don't offer. Bigger Cake is about the same. It's a data company. They show like different trends on campaigns, but they also have sets of tools to allow to maximize the launch of a Kickstarter campaign. Interestingly, there's two things. Pledge Manager is something that Kickstarter tries to integrate themselves internally. They have a new Pledge Manager system. It's still very rudimental. Unless you have something simple, you probably would want to use some of the third parties. And last thing, they also try to give more tools to the creators by creating more systems for creators to promote their games, promote their campaigns ahead of time. So it's all coming like together as the two new things coming up are more into this set of things. And that's it. That's me.